relying on blockbusters to get us through is a death sentence. At least that's according to Shawn Layden, who was at Gamescom Asia, had an entire panel interview, and in this he did talk about something that has come up quite a bit over the past few years, and that has to do with the unsustainability, it seems, when it comes to the gaming market, specifically with AAA games, and as we've discussed, budgets and the amount of time it takes to get these games out, and what happens if that big game that costs a ton of money does not perform well. A lot of times we see a studio just go away, sometimes after a single release. Well, in this interview, Shawn Layden did talk about concerns with the middle part of that market, what we would typically call AA games. And I wanted to go over that here today because I do think it is something that is pretty important right now for just gaming in general. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, this was in a conversation with, they say, Raw Fury co-founder and chief publishing officer Gordon Van Dyke. Layden gave his thoughts on the disappearance of AA studios and why that's a bad thing for the industry going forward. This was covered by gamesindustry.biz, and I'll have a link to this entire article down below, but I went ahead and highlighted some of the key quotes from Layden, where he said, in the past, we spent a lot more time looking at games, not asking what's your monetization scheme, or what's your recurrent revenue plan, or what's your subscription formula. We asked the simple question, is it fun? Are we having a good time? If you said yes to those questions, you'd usually get a green light. You didn't worry so much about the end piece, for better or for worse. Of course, back then, you didn't make a game for millions of dollars, so your risk tolerance was fairly high. Today, the entry cost for making a AAA game is in the triple-digit millions now. I think naturally risk tolerance drops and you're looking at sequels, you're looking at copycats, because the finance guys who draw the line say, well, if Fortnite made this much money in the amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this in that amount of time. We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidation and the high cost of production. This is something we've I think people have noticed, and it has come up quite a bit, is creativity has, I'm sure, taken a step back compared to, I mean, you could say last generation, but definitely during the Xbox 360, PS3, Wii era, it felt like so many IPs were just popping up all over the place. And even some that are relied on today, like Ubisoft is leaning more and more towards just being an Assassin's Creed company. Well, they created that during the Xbox 360, PS3 generation. And that was a time where things were cheaper, obviously, to make. Budgets were less, and the price of a game was $60 then. And we just saw recently game prices go up to $70, this generation specifically, right? So it did take a while for game prices to go up, but as is being discussed here by Shawn Layden, because of that, we know these companies are always looking for more money, and the way that they've done that are recurrent revenue plans or monetization schemes. And as he's saying here, that's one of the first things they really ask about is, how is your game designed around the idea of extracting more money from gamers? Not necessarily is the game fun. And that's the funny thing, is a lot of gamers now can kind of see through this stuff. Think of Suicide Squad, for example. That is one that really sticks out in my mind, where they were showing it off and we were thinking, okay, that's not really what we were expecting to see, because it looks like a run-of-the-mill online third-person shooter, and then they show all kinds of numbers and weapon types that are rare and epic, and then they have a battle pass. It goes, okay, was this game planned out so that it could specifically take advantage of these post-spend schemes, these monetization plans? So that's the other thing, is gamers have become very, very much trained to look for these things in these different games. Goes on to say, in the gaming business, you have Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, indie stuff, but then that middle piece, that middle layer that used to be where Interplay, Gremlin, Ocean, THQ, all those companies made their money, that middle piece is gone. If you can become AAA, you survive, or if you do something interesting in the indie space, you could, but AA is gone. I think that's a threat to the ecosystem, if you will. So I'm looking at indie stuff with the advent of technologies like the latest Unreal Engine or what Unity can give you. I think we can all say that the standard quality of video games is pretty high now compared to 10 years ago. Now, if we can just get a bit more interest and excitement and exposure for these lower budget but super creative and super unusual type of games, I'd like to see more of that, because if we're just going to rely on blockbusters to get us through, I think that's a death sentence. So I will say this, blockbusters in general, like AAA games, as much as people will push back on many of them, they do have the place in the sense that they bring eyeballs to gaming. Like in terms of mainstream, they really stick out because they are over the top in terms of quality, content, scope, the characters, you name it. They typically spend a lot of money, and at the end of the whole thing, more times than not, you can at least see that it is a high quality product. But I think AA games in particular do still have a place, because at the end of the day, the game itself, if it's fun, you'll overlook polishing issues or little things where you go, okay, yeah, obviously they weren't able to maybe complete this animation, or they did something off screen that could have been played out on screen, but maybe they just didn't want to allot the money or time to that. You'll look past that if, for example, like RoboCop Rogue City, that's a game that you can see is like that middle tier level game in terms of some of the quality stuff, but it was just a fun game. You're RoboCop, you're rolling around, taking out bad guys, exploring the city, and it was just fun. And that's what it comes down to. If a game's fun, you will tend to overlook any of these issues. The problem we come down to right now is, as Shawn Layden's mentioning, it seems like now you're either indie or you're AAA. There seems to be an issue with finding that middle ground anymore, which is kind of strange, because I do feel like the gulf between AAA and AA is bigger than ever right now. So it's to the point where if you spent $10 million on a project, $20 million even, maybe more, you would be considered AA. For AAA, we hear about budgets like with Spider-Man 2 that's more than $300 million. We hear about how Ghost of Tsushima was built for less than $100 million, or Ratchet and Clank was built for less than that. And then, oh wait, their next project's going to be double or even triple that. So you see how quickly things can work up exponentially, especially recently with inflation. So AA games do have the benefit of costing less, but also shorter development time. And I think above all else, that is the biggest issue right now when we see these AAA games, is how long they take to make. Sure, they can cost a lot of money, but as we've seen in gaming, if it's good, you can make a lot of money. It's just, it takes 6, 7, 8 years now. One game a generation from some of these big studios, which is way different from what it used to be, where Rockstar would put out 3 Grand Theft Auto games in a generation, 4 sometimes, maybe more, even doing Grand Theft Auto games on different handhelds too. So it was much more of a rapid pace back then versus now. But to compound on top of that, he did say, and I think that's so important for the overall global gaming system, because the one thing I've been talking about in my 5 years since I've retired is very simple. We need more people playing games. It's a $250 billion global business, but the actual number of players doesn't grow at the same pace. So we're getting more money from the same people. You need to get more people playing games. How do you do that? We need to get more people making games. And that's something that isn't really talked about that much, in the sense that we seem to have a very similar audience size between generations. And it also appears that people who play console games, the average age is going up, which means the people are just basically, they're just selling to the same people, and they're just getting older with the brand. So with PlayStation or with Nintendo or Microsoft, and we're not really bringing in a lot of the younger gamers, or as much as really we used to, that would enter the space, because they may be playing stuff on tablets, right? Playing stuff on phones, or I mean, there's so much competition when it comes to just entertainment right now in gaming off of these consoles, that, I mean, I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of gamers in 5 or 6 years that have never even really used a controller like that, which is weird to think, right? They're just so used to touch screens or anything like that. That it's you look at a typical PlayStation controller with the classic symmetrical sticks and the regular button layout and a D-pad, and it just looks foreign to them. So that, I think, is a concern, where if these games are going to keep costing more and more money, you either have to sell to more people, or you just have to make things more expensive for the people that are here. And that technically is already happening. So, for example, I wouldn't be shocked if next generation, maybe game prices go up to $80. That's something that would not surprise me at all, unless they can figure out a way to rein in some of these budgets. And I don't know if they will, because it sounds like some of these games are even more expensive than Spider-Man 2, which, I mean, Grand Theft Auto 6, how much money do you think that cost Rockstar and Take-Two to make? I feel like that number would be eye-popping if they told us. Don't know if they ever will. I mean, maybe they'll explain it to investors, but the $300 some odd million budget that we hear about with Spider-Man 2, unless things start to change, I think, with gaming, will look like a drop in the bucket in like a decade. And that is wild to think about. But if you do look at the current install size of the high-end gaming market, so typically we have these kind of sectioned off now, as we saw with, for example, the FTC case with them and Microsoft. They kind of took Nintendo and sectioned them off from the quote-unquote console high-end market, and that was mostly just Xbox and PlayStation. Well, if you look at that now, it kind of feels like this generation for that sector is going to shrink in number of players from last generation. And some of that, I think, does have to do with Microsoft coming up a bit short compared to their Xbox One, which sounds crazy, but the Xbox Series, I don't think, is going to catch the Xbox One. And I do still have questions if the PS5 will inevitably catch the PS4, although it is a more expensive system just outright, from launch, and then also the PS5 Pro, whereas the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X technically both launched at the same $500 price point. So when you consider that as well, it's like, ooh, okay, hold on. Are we shrinking in terms of player count? Or maybe Nintendo is pulling a lot of people as well, and we'll see with their next system that maybe is closer to that high-end market with NVIDIA and some of the stuff they may be doing with their new Tegra. Then maybe it'll start to blur back together and everything will even out in terms of the install sizes. But he's absolutely right. It's going to get tough for many of these companies if the number of people playing these games don't grow, or if they can't figure out ways to get more people in, like going to mobile devices and having a success there. I mean, that would be a big one, I feel like, for them, or even exploring things outside of just gaming, as we see with other forms of media, whether it's Nintendo with their theme parks, all these companies with their movies, the merchandise, that sort of thing. Really tap into the mainstream, and maybe then they can bring them back to gaming. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, because I have been paying more and more attention to these AA games, quote unquote. I've been looking past some of the shortcomings of them when it comes to quality, or the obvious places where they may budget cut, because it does kind of remind me of those days from way back when with the PS2, the Xbox, the GameCube, and so on, the 360 and PS3, because those are some really interesting and fun times to discover those kinds of games. And while I do enjoy my big AAA releases when they come out, which is seemingly more fewer and far between nowadays, I do still get a kick out of seeing what creative stuff they can come up with there, especially if they grab a license like a RoboCop. Yes, I'm interested to see what they come up with, but let me know what you guys thought about all this down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.